I just listened to every album by Alice Cooper, and here are my thoughts. 29 albums. This is the longest discography that I've been through so far, and 95% of it was all new material to me. I bought a greatest hits compilation when I was a teenager, so I knew those songs, and then I bought 2 albums later on, Pretty's For You and Love It to Death, so I knew those albums. Everything else was brand new to me. This was a fun one to go through. Naturally, it's a bit overwhelming. I'm going to have to go back and revisit some of the material, just because when you listen to 29 albums over the course of like 7 days, it's hard to retain all of that. But Alice Cooper starts off as a psychedelic avant-garde rock band. They're signed onto Frank Zappa's record label. And as you would expect Frank Zappa to do, he liked Alice Cooper because he said he didn't get them, he didn't understand them. The music was bizarre, it had weird time signature switches, just overall unconventional. And that period lasted for only 2 albums. These albums were okay. They were definitely, they had a certain charm to them, but ultimately each album only had a couple of songs that I really liked. Like Reflected from Pretty's For You, which was later reworked to be Elected, which showed up on a later album. I also liked Applebush from this one. The second album, Easy Action, had a couple songs I liked, like Mister and Misdemeanor. Right after this is when Alice Cooper really becomes Alice Cooper. They sign on Bob Ezrin as a producer. This is what really kicks off his career. And he kind of forces them to be this very straightforward American hard rock that we know Alice Cooper for right now. Now, these next 6 albums largely represent the best of what Alice Cooper has to offer. The first 2 of this series, Love It to Death and Killer, I think are Alice Cooper's best albums. Every song was amazing. Love It to Death had Black Juju and The Ballad of Dwight Fry. Halo of Flies from Killer absolutely blew me away. School's Out and Muscle of Love were a little more uneven as albums go, meaning to me that they had like 2 really great songs that definitely are some of the best that Alice Cooper has done. The rest of the album just kind of ran together. It wasn't as noteworthy or as solid as the other albums in this era. Between those 2 was Billion Dollar Babies, though, and that was an especially strong album, almost as good as Love It to Death and Killer. Now, after Muscle of Love in 1973, the band decides to take a break because they've been recording and touring nonstop, and they never officially get back together. Alice Cooper, the vocalist, records a solo album called Welcome to My Nightmare that just absolutely takes off and is another one of the best albums that his name has ever been attached to. He leans into the showmanship, he leans into the character of Alice Cooper, and this album's title track was just amazing. I liked Black Widow, I loved Cold Ethel. But that, to me, closes the best of Alice Cooper period of albums, and we go into the next stage, which I think of as the substance abuse period of his career. Alice Cooper didn't suffer as much in his substance abuse period as I think a lot of other bands did, because he was able to translate his period of substance abuse into leaning more into the character of Alice Cooper with more theater, more humor, more kind of like sinister theatrics, I guess. The songwriting overall was still definitely there. It just wasn't as strong as it was before. So Goes to Hell and Lace and Whiskey were pretty good albums, I thought. They each had 1 or 2 songs that I thought were amazing. But then he releases From the Inside. From the Inside was an amazing album that chronicles his time at a rehab/mental health facility. Each song on it, I read on Wikipedia, each song on it is about a person that was there with him, mostly patients, in one case, a nurse. I think that From the Inside is his best album that is not in his best of period that I had just covered. But he leaves that facility and is supposedly sober now. Except he's not, he's smoking crack. That's why we still have 4 albums to cover in the substance abuse period. This period of albums, it grows on you. Like I was saying before, he is really deep into substance abuse now, but he still carries over so much personality in the music. It's not that he's writing big radio hits at this time, but the albums as a whole still carry this very consistent and likable attitude. Special Forces, Zipper Catches Skin, and Dada were 3 albums that he calls his blackout period because he doesn't remember recording them at all. And now he's sober for real, and releases 4 albums that I consider to be his hair metal phase. This goes from 86 to 91 and covers Constrictor, Raise Your Fist and Yell, Trash, and Hey Stupid. Of these albums, Trash is noticeably the best. It has one of his biggest hits, Poison, on it. The rest of the album just was really good too. There's several good songs on it, like House of Fire, Bed of Nails, and This Maniac's in Love With You. Those were all standouts for me. The other 3 albums in this period, they had 1 or 2 songs that I thought felt amazing. They were so lively and bombastic, and he's really owning this hair metal era. The rest of the albums, though, and that's like 80% of the albums, the abundance of very forgettable fillery material is starting to weigh on me at this point. And so as a whole, I found these albums to be a bit tiring. The next 6 albums I call his youth pastor era. The reason I call it that is because he is leaning heavy into promoting his Christian faith now, and if he does write music about sex, drugs, money, and rock and roll, like he did before, now the underlying message is that Satan's going to get you with all these temptations, but Jesus died for you, so it's okay. I may notice themes like that more than most people would because I was raised in an evangelical cult, but to me those themes are inherently non-subversive and they just don't work well with rock music. From this era, I thought that The Eyes of Alice Cooper was his best album. None of the material in here was specifically bad. Some of it was his heaviest material he's ever written because he was leaning into an early 2000s industrial sound. For the most part, though, this era was, 1 or 2 songs on each of these albums was either pretty good, possibly really good, and the rest of the album was just really forgettable. And that brings us to this kind of final era of his music, where he largely drops having a band, and instead, in recording, he just works with session musicians. The songwriting here got noticeably stronger, especially in 2011's Welcome to My Nightmare, the sequel to the 1970s album. As an album, I thought this was great, and almost every song I really liked it. This album is just so entertaining, and he really leans into like a classic horror, kind of in a goofy direction, and it just comes off as so likable. Paranormal was just okay. Dynamite Road was my favorite song from this album, but then the final 2 albums come up, which I think are a noticeable improvement. So that's Detroit Stories in 2021, which is a just celebration of the Detroit rock scene that Alice came up in. And then we had Road in 2023, which I thought was about as good as Detroit Stories. Consistent songwriting throughout the whole albums, and adds 2 or maybe 3 really good songs for a greatest hits collection. And that brings us to the end. There is my album ranking. The first 5, spots number 1 through 5, are albums that I listened to and thought, this is a masterpiece. From spots 6 to 10, these are albums that I listened to and came away thinking, like, wow, like what a great album. It adds a few classics into the mix while keeping me entertained throughout the entire thing. Spots 11 through 17 are more so albums that I thought, hey, this album maybe didn't add any classics, but it was solid all the way throughout. Or maybe it did add a couple of really strong classics or greatest hits, but the rest of the album fell a little bit more flat. And then from 18 all the way down to 29 are albums in a descending order that I was just gradually losing interest in. I'm pretty much out of time for this video. I knew I would have to make a second video anyway, because how am I going to fit 29 albums worth of favorite songs onto a video where I already had to blaze through his career? But yeah, thank you for watching, and then yeah, part 2 is going to be my favorite songs.